Rosa Galvez.
Dear colleagues, I rise at third reading as a sponsor in the Senate of Bill C-12, an act respecting transparency and accountability in Canada's effort to achieve net zero greenhouse emissions by the year 2050. In November 2020, the government tabled this bill, which will enshrine in legislation Canada's commitment to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and provide a comprehensive framework of accountability and transparency to ensure governments undertake the planning, take the actions, and conduct the monitoring needed to achieve that goal. In May 2021, Bill C-12 was referred to the Standing Committee on Environment and Sustainable Development of the other place for consideration and study. The bill of 29 sections has been strengthened by over 30 amendments proposed by several parties in the other place. In terms of amendment, I would like to first highlight the most important one, which offers an opportunity for potential improvement to the legislation. There will be a comprehensive review of the provisions and operation at the Act 5 years after it comes into force, to be undertaken by the relevant committee of the Senate, of the House of Commons, or both Houses of Parliament. This ensures that we, parliamentarians, can examine the effectiveness of the Act with the benefit of 5 years' experience and make recommendations for improvement at that point. The objective of Bill C-12 is for Canada to achieve net zero by 2050. That is, all anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions are balanced by anthropogenic removals. The update of version of Bill C-12 clarifies that nothing in the Act precludes Canada attaining net zero emissions before 2050. In other words, net zero is a race, not something that we should wait until 2050 to hit. If we can reach the goal earlier, it will be great, and nothing in the law prevents that kind of ambition. Climate science is clear that early action is crucial to avoid catastrophic consequences. Many stakeholders and Canadians voiced their concern at the original version of Bill that did not go far enough to ensure accountability prior to 2030. I'm pleased that the purpose section of the bill was amended to add the emphasis on, and I quote, immediate and ambitious actions, end quote. An interim objective for 2026 was added, and progress reports are required in 2023 and 2025, in addition to the 2027 progress report. Furthermore, the 2025 progress report must contain an assessment of the 2030 target and must include changes being made to course correct if needed to achieve the target. Moreover, the bill now requires that the first report of the Commissioner of the Environment and Sustainable Development be submitted by the end of 2024. These changes provide for and ensure almost yearly meaningful accountability checkpoints over the next decade, which also inform our parliamentary review in 5 years. The other place also work on improving the bill's provision in relation to targets. First, the bill now codifies the 2030 greenhouse emission target by incorporating Canada's nationally determined contribution, its NDC, for that year and the Paris Agreement. This amendment was preceded by Canada's commitment made at the Leaders' Summit on Climate in April 2021 to enhance its emissions reduction target under the Paris Agreement to 40 to 45 below the 2005 levels. With Bill C-12, the 2030 and 2050 targets will now be clearly enshrined in legislation. In addition, clarifications were made to ensure that each greenhouse emission target set under the Act must be a progression from the previous one, preventing backsliding on Canada's greenhouse gas emission target. The bill now provides that all targets that remain between 2030 and 2050 must be at least 10 years before the beginning of its corresponding milestone year. Instead of the 5 years in the original bill, we will have now 10 years in advance. This will ensure the government starts planning for future targets sufficiently ahead of time, providing a great opportunity for long-term planning. Going a step further, the bill now requires the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change to publish a high-level description of the key emission reduction measures to achieve the target and the latest projection of greenhouse gas emission within a year of setting the targets of 2035, 2040, and 2045. If we take, for example, the 2035 target, it will need to be set by the Minister at the latest on December 1st, 2024, and the high-level description of key measures and projection will be public by December 1st, 2025. The detailed emission reduction plan in relation to the 2035 target must be established at least 5 years prior to deadline, meaning not later than December 2029. Another set of amendments reinforces the involvement of Indigenous people. The preamble now states the Government of Canada's commitment to considering Indigenous knowledge when carrying out the purpose of this Act. Related amendments require the Minister to consider Indigenous knowledge when setting greenhouse gas emission reduction targets, and as an expertise requirement of the advisory body as a whole. Emission reduction plans must also consider the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. The bill now includes more detail on the required content of these plans. It is now mandatory to include in each plan a description of how Canada's international commitment with respect to climate change are considered, the projection of the annual greenhouse gas emission reduction resulting from the plan's combined measure and strategy, and a summary of the cooperative measure or agreements with provinces and other governments in Canada. We heard criticism about this bill not setting legally binding targets, but I would like to bring your attention to Section 9.1, which states that the Minister must establish a greenhouse reduction plan for achieving the target. So there is an obligation to plan for success. Similarly, Progress Report must include Canada's most recent published greenhouse gas emission projection for the next milestone and details on any additional measures that could be taken to increase the probability of achieving the target, if the projections indicate that a target will not be met. Similar content is also required in the assessment reports. The amended bill also took into consideration concern with respect to the advisory body. The Act now specifies that the Net Zero Advisory Body provides with independent advice on achieving net zero emissions by 2050 and on targets and plans. With respect to the membership of the advisory body, the amended bill contains a provision requiring the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change to consider the need for the advisory body as a whole to have expertise in or knowledge of, among other subjects, the following: climate change science, indigenous knowledge, physical and social science, climate change policy at the national, subnational, and international levels, energy supply and demand, and relevant technologies. These explicit requirements of independence and expertise bring Canada into the international best practice club in that regard. I note that our own committee pre-study report included an observation on the administrative independence for the advisory body, including control of its own budget and secretariat, which I hope will be considered by the government. Regarding avoiding conflict of interest, the Conflict of Interest Act of 2006, which applies to all public office holders, will also apply to members of the advisory body. In line with the bill's objective of transparency and accountability, Bill C-12 requires the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change to publish the advisory body report 30 days after receiving it and to respond publicly within 120 days. Moreover, the bill requires that the minister response to the Net Zero Advisory body address any difference between the target he or she sets and the target recommended by the Net Zero Advisory body. Lastly, C-12, in some ways, is stronger than the UK Climate Change Act, held as the gold standard. It's better in terms of the levels of details required in plans and reports and their timing. Our new course correction mechanism under Section 14 to 16 is much stronger. So is the obligation of the Minister of Finance to report on financial risk of climate change, but also on economic opportunities. The fact that targets can only get stronger is also not present in UK law. The NF committee began its pre-study on Monday, June 7, and met each day that week. The committee heard from 35 witnesses representing 22 groups and 5 individuals in 11.5 hours of hearing. Since the other place did not hear from any indigenous witnesses in their study of the bill, it was a priority for our study to be able to hear from those groups who are disproportionately impacted by climate change. We heard from our individual First Nation and indigenous climate action. There was consensus among witnesses that Bill C-12 is an important piece of legislation and that a climate accountability framework is desperately needed. Maintenant, en tant qu'environnementaliste, j'aurais souhaité un projet de loi plus ambitieux, mais en réalité, hélas, nous n'avons plus le temps à gaspiller. Un temps vaut mieux que deux tu l'auras. Je suis fermement convaincue que ce projet de loi est présentement la meilleure opportunité d'action rapide pour répondre à l'urgence climatique et pour le bien-être des générations futures. Il est impératif que le Parlement fournisse le cadre juridique qui garantira la responsabilité et la transparence des gouvernements successifs quant à leurs actions pour lutter contre le changement climatique et ses effets néfastes. Le 17 juin 2019, une grande majorité des élus de la Chambre des communes ont adopté une motion déclarant, et je cite, « Le Canada est en situation d'urgence climatique nationale, en réponse à laquelle le Canada doit s'engager à atteindre ses objectifs nationaux en matière des émissions énoncés dans l'accord de Paris et à procéder à des réductions plus importantes conformément à l'objectif de l'accord de maintenir le réchauffement planétaire sur la barre de 2 degrés Celsius et de poursuivre les efforts pour demeurer sur la barre de 1,5 degrés Celsius. » Fin de la citation. Depuis cette date, la situation climatique au Canada ne s'est pas améliorée. Au contraire, ça s'est empiré. Le projet de loi C-12 est la suite logique qui suit cette reconnaissance d'une urgence climatique. Je souhaite remercier tous les sénateurs et sénatrices qui ont mis temps et énergie à l'étude de ce projet de loi, particulièrement les membres du Comité de l'énergie, de l'environnement et des ressources naturelles qui se sont rencontrés successivement sur plusieurs jours afin que nous puissions faire notre travail de parlementaires bien informés. J'espère que vous voterez tous avec moi en faveur de cette version renforcée de C-12 qui vise à finalement répondre aux causes du changement climatique dans ces pays afin que nous tous, citoyens canadiens et du monde entier, incluant les générations futures, puissons bénéficier d'une vie prospère sur cette terre. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Miigwech.